I'm Alara Vance, 29, female. I work as a financial analyst for a major investment firm, a job that requires attention to detail and zero tolerance for fraud. For years, I had meticulously built my credit score and savings, always prioritizing my own financial stability. That stability was compromised, however, when my mother, Diane Vance, was hit with a cascade of terrifying medical bills after a sudden illness. Because her insurance coverage had gaps, and she couldn't afford a high-interest medical loan, I did the only thing I felt a good daughter could do. I opened a new credit card with a $50,000 limit, in my name alone, explicitly for her care. It was supposed to be a lifeline, a sacred trust reserved for deductibles, prescriptions, and copays. Instead, she treated it like an inheritance for my younger sister, Chloe, a move that turned my attempt at kindness into a $47,000 mountain of debt and a catastrophic act of betrayal. They thought my mother's illness would shield them from accountability, and that I would never prosecute family. They thought wrong. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. I will never forget the look on my mother's face when I handed her the credit card. It was a new platinum Visa, embossed with my name, Alara Vance, and a generous $50,000 limit that I had spent weeks securing at a promotional 0% APR for the first year. "This is only for your treatments, Mom," I had stressed, sitting beside her hospital bed. "I can track the statements, and we'll get through this together, but keep it secure. It's a dedicated medical fund." She promised me, tearfully, that she would. Diane Vance was a retired nurse. She understood the gravity of medical costs and the value of my financial sacrifice. I paid the first few legitimate bills myself. Co-pays, a physical therapy retainer, a few high-cost medications. The balance remained low, around $3,000, and my peace of mind was intact. The plan was working. Then, my mother was discharged and moved back home, where my sister, Chloe, was living rent-free and had been unemployed for over a year. Chloe was always the financially irresponsible one, relying on Mom for everything, prone to explosive spending when she had access to cash or credit. I gave them both the benefit of the doubt, telling myself that the card was safe in Mom's possession. I had access to the online statements, but with my demanding schedule as a financial analyst, I only checked them cursorily once a month, mainly confirming the monthly minimum was paid via auto draft from my account. 6 months in, I was preparing for a major audit presentation at work, buried under spreadsheets, when a fraud alert finally snagged my attention. It wasn't the bank, it was my own internal alarm system. A sudden, sharp dip in my credit score. Puzzled, I pulled up the latest credit card statement. The balance wasn't $5 and it was $47,218.44. I felt the floor drop out from under me. Panic and a cold, visceral anger washed over me in equal measure. The balance was nearly maxed out, and the introductory 0% APR was about to expire, meaning I would soon be slammed with thousands in high-interest fees. I immediately clicked through the transaction history. The list was a horrifying inventory of high-end retail and frivolous spending. There were no charges for the hospital or physical therapy, which were now being paid by a different, smaller card my father must have opened. The $47,000 included charges from luxury department stores, boutique travel agencies, several $1,000s in online gaming microtransactions, a high-end designer handbag outlet, and, the final, sickening detail, a $9,000 wire transfer marked simply, Rang T, for an apartment in a city 3 states away, a city where Chloe had recently moved to. Start over. I called my mother first, my voice shaking with a professional calm I barely possessed. "Mom, the medical card has a balance of over $47,000. Can you explain these charges?" Her response was a weak, stammering defense. "Oh, honey, I know. I thought Chloe needed a little help. She said she'd pay it back. She just needed a fresh start, and I didn't want her to struggle like I did." She admitted it. She had knowingly handed my credit card, opened under my name and carrying my financial risk, to the most financially reckless person in our family, enabling over $47,000 in fraudulent, non-medical debt. The trust wasn't broken, it was shattered into irreparable pieces. My mother's perceived good intentions for one daughter resulted in the financial destruction of the other. I told her two things before hanging up. First, I was placing an immediate fraud alert on the card. And second, I was treating this as a criminal case, not a family disagreement. My immediate concern was damage control, but my long-term goal was justice. The moment I hung up with my mother, the financial analyst took over. My hands were shaking, but my brain was calculating interest accrual and credit score recovery timelines. I immediately called the credit card company and filed a detailed fraud report, listing every charge over the initial $3,000 I authorized for medical use. This was the critical first step to stopping the compounding interest and removing the negative hit on my credit report. The card company, following protocol, provisionally credited the $44,000 balance while they launched their investigation. The problem, I knew, was the person who authorized the spending: my mother, Diane, who had possession of the physical card, and was my sister Chloe's accomplice. I couldn't claim the card was stolen by a stranger when my mother was the one who willingly facilitated the spending. That would legally make me the victim of a crime: identity theft and credit card fraud, perpetrated by my mother and sister, and the card company would expect me to pursue them. The emotional exhaustion was immediate, but I had to confront Chloe. I used her new apartment's address, revealed by that $9,000 rent payment, to track her down via a professional public records search I ran through a colleague's platform. When I finally reached her via text, she did not apologize. She went straight to denial and deflection, using the familiar family script of me being the rich, unfeeling sister. "It's not my fault, Elora. Mom said it was okay. She said you had plenty of money and wouldn't even notice. I'm finally building a life for myself, and you're trying to ruin it over a stupid credit card you barely use?" Her lack of remorse hardened my resolve. She had no job, no assets, and was already planning her next spending spree on my credit. Her delusion that I wouldn't notice $47,000 was the ultimate slap in the face to my career and my intelligence. I explained, in stark, precise terms, that this was not a family loan, it was felony fraud and identity theft, crimes carrying significant legal penalties, including jail time. She sent back a laughing emoji. She genuinely believed she was immune. This denial solidified my path. I needed irrefutable evidence tying Chloe to the fraudulent transactions, and showing that my mother willingly abdicated her duty to safeguard the card. I reached out to Mark Stevens, a former colleague who had transitioned into forensic accounting and specialized in unraveling financial crimes for civil litigation. He was expensive, but securing my financial future was priceless. Mark's first instruction was simple: stop talking to them. He told me that every interaction, especially my attempts to guilt or reason with them, was only giving them emotional ammunition and diluting the legal case. The case had to be built on paper, not emotion. I gave Mark the statements, the police report number from the fraud filing, and the address for Chloe's new apartment. My life was now split between my high-pressure job analyzing corporate balance sheets and building a case against my own blood. I spent my evenings downloading every piece of data related to those transactions: shipping addresses, IP logs from the online game purchases, and even social media posts where Chloe flaunted her new designer goods. The $47,000 wasn't just a number. It was a devastating portrait of two women who valued my sister's selfish wants over my entire financial future. The next step wasn't about seeking an apology. It was about ensuring they paid every last cent, legally and definitively. With the case officially handed over to Mark Stevens, the forensic investigation began, transforming my personal nightmare into a cold, professional task. Mark operated like a digital detective, and my job as the analyst was to provide him with the raw data. The card company's provisional credit had given me a temporary reprieve from the immediate debt payments, but the clock was ticking on the investigation, and my credit score remained damaged by the initial max out report. Mark's focus was on establishing intent and beneficial receipt of the funds by Chloe, and complicity by Diane. The credit card statements were the foundation, but the supporting digital evidence was the structure. I started with the most concrete charges: the retail spending, I contacted the major department stores where the expensive clothing and accessories were purchased. As the cardholder, I had the legal standing to request detailed records, including purchase receipts, shipping addresses, and, most importantly, the IP addresses used for the online transactions. The information came back confirming my fears. All packages were shipped to Chloe's new apartment in the distant city, and the IP logs for the online purchases, including the thousands spent on gaming, traced directly back to the Wi-Fi network at that same address. The chain of evidence was irrefutable. Next, I focused on the 9,000 wire transfer used for rent. Mark investigated the bank that received the wire and determined the recipient was the landlord for Chloe's high-end, 2-bedroom apartment. The rental lease, which we obtained through a subpoena, listed Chloe as the sole tenant. This proved that 9,000 of my credit was used to fund her new lifestyle, a far cry from my mother's medical bills. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source: social media. While I had blocked Chloe on every platform, Mark instructed me to create a burner account and look at her public profile. There, in high-definition glory, were photos of Chloe posing in her new, expensive apartment, showing off the designer handbag, and the same accessories that matched the major transactions on my statement. The posts were geotagged to her new city. Mark compiled all this into a massive, indexed evidence binder: bank statements, shipping manifests, IP logs, rental agreements, and photographic proof of the stolen funds' utility. This binder was the professional answer to my mother's emotional defense and Chloe's denials. This wasn't circumstantial. It was a meticulously constructed case of first-degree identity theft and criminal fraud. The case was now so strong that Mark recommended we bypass immediate civil court and go straight to the district attorney's office. He explained that a criminal finding would force restitution and give me a legal pathway to have the fraudulent charges permanently dismissed from my credit history, something a civil suit couldn't guarantee as quickly. I had to face the reality that filing a criminal report meant my sister, Chloe Vance, could face jail time. It was a harrowing thought, but compared to the idea of carrying 47,000 in debt that would permanently cripple my ability to buy a house or invest for my future, it was a necessary evil. I had offered them a medical lifeline. They used it as a getaway vehicle for grand theft. The time for family excuses was over. The forensic audit Mark conducted went beyond simple transaction tracking. It sought to expose the motive and the level of my mother's complicity. It wasn't enough to prove Chloe spent the money. We had to prove Diane's active role in authorizing and concealing the fraud, establishing a clear breach of the trust I had explicitly placed in her. Mark looked into Diane's financial health prior to her illness. As a retired nurse, her income was stable but modest. She lived almost entirely off her pension and Social Security. When I asked Mark about his findings, he presented a simple, devastating picture. Your mother was consistently enabling Chloe before this, just on a smaller scale, he explained. She was subsidizing Chloe's failed attempts at starting businesses and paying her minor debts. When you provided the $50 in Lozen Lifeline, your mother saw it not just as a medical fund, but as the largest, most accessible pool of capital she'd ever had to satisfy Chloe's constant, demanding need for money. The motive, Mark concluded, was parental favoritism and financial desperation. Diane couldn't bear to see Chloe struggle, and, in her own misguided view, believed she was helping by accessing what she considered to be my excess wealth. She rationalized the fraud by convincing herself I would simply absorb the cost or, as Chloe put it, wouldn't notice. Mark was able to prove that Diane was present for the initial luxury purchases made online. The IP addresses occasionally overlapped between her home and Chloe's new apartment, and that Diane actively helped conceal the crime by intercepting the physical credit card statements that were still being made to her old address, tossing them before I could see them. We compiled the evidence for the district attorney. Mark included a section on the emotional cost of the fraud, the severe drop in my credit utilization ratio, the stress of fighting creditors, and the time I diverted from my high-profile job to manage this domestic crisis. This wasn't just about 47,000. It was about the destruction of my meticulously built financial identity. Before submitting the evidence to the DA, Mark sent a formal, final demand letter, a cease and desist and demand for restitution, to both Diane and Chloe, delivered via process servers. The letter outlined the full scope of our evidence, including the social media photos, the IP logs, and the explicit crime, grand theft and financial identity theft under state statute. The demand was simple: repay the $47,218.44 in full within 7 days, or the case would be formally handed over to the DA's Economic Crimes Unit for criminal prosecution. The response was silence, followed by a tearful, manipulative call from my mother, begging me not to involve the police. "Alara, Chloe will never get a job with a felony on her record. Please? For the sake of the family, just let us pay you back slowly." "It was a mistake," she pleaded. "It wasn't a mistake, Mom," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "It was a calculated crime over 6 months. You made your choice when you let her spend my credit limit. Now, I have to make mine." The 7 days passed without a payment. The emotional curtain had officially closed. The legal process was now my only family. The deadline came and went. 7 days of silence proved my mother's desperation outweighed her capacity for honesty, and my sister's arrogance superseded any sense of self-preservation. On the morning of the 8th day, Mark Stevens and I walked into the district attorney's office and formally filed the complaint. We didn't rely on a police officer taking a report. We submitted the organized, forensically audited package directly to the economic crimes prosecutor, an approach Mark assured me would expedite the process and show the seriousness of the complaint. The prosecutor, after reviewing the evidence binder, the bank wire for rent, the shipping addresses, and the mother's recorded admission that she authorized the spending, agreed that this constituted a clear case of grand theft and conspiracy to commit fraud. The fact that Chloe used the card repeatedly across state lines also introduced potential federal wire fraud charges, which significantly raised the stakes. The prosecutor was particularly troubled by my mother's role as the enabler. He informed us that while Chloe was the primary perpetrator of the theft, Diane, by intentionally providing the card and then concealing the crime, was an accomplice and equally liable in a civil sense, and potentially criminally liable for conspiracy. Within 48 hours, a detective was assigned to the case. The first action taken was filing charges against Chloe Vance for grand theft and identity theft. A warrant for her arrest was issued, and law enforcement in her new city was notified. This was the moment of no return. I had officially placed my sister in the crosshairs of the U.S. legal system. The second, more complex action was the civil suit filed against both Chloe Vance and Diane Vance. The civil complaint sought to recover the $47,218.44 and all associated legal fees, forensic accounting costs, and the substantial interest that had already accrued. It was an unusual move to sue the mother, but given Diane's active role in facilitating the crime and her assets, her retirement savings and home equity, it was the only way to guarantee restitution and show the court the extent of her betrayal. My mother called me, not in tears, but in a panicked, hysterical rage. "They arrested Chloe, Alara. They brought her in handcuffs. You've ruined her life? How could you do this to your own sister? Your own family?" she screamed. "You ruined her life, Mom," I stated flatly. "You gave her a license to commit a felony with my financial future. I gave you and Chloe a chance to resolve this civilly. You chose silence. The consequences now belong to the state and the courts." I immediately informed the credit card company that criminal charges had been filed and provided them with the case number. The strength of the criminal prosecution allowed the card company to finalize the investigation, confirming the charges were indeed fraudulent. Within a week, the 44,000 provisional credit was made permanent, and the negative reporting on my credit history related to the maxed out balance began the process of being removed. My credit score immediately began to rebound. The financial damage was being undone, but the personal rift was now a canyon. The criminal case against Chloe Vance moved quickly. Facing irrefutable evidence, the IP logs, the shipping records, and the mother's willingness to testify that she provided the card, The public defender advised Chloe that her best course of action was to plead guilty to a lesser charge and agree to full restitution. The confrontation I truly dreaded was at the civil court, hearing for the order of restitution. I sat in the courtroom with Mark, facing my mother and sister, who were now flanked by a civil defense attorney. Chloe looked pale and defeated, the reality of her felony charge finally crashing down. But it was my mother, Diane, who remained defiant. She tried to make eye contact with me, her face a mask of wounded motherhood, desperately trying to guilt me into withdrawing the civil suit. During her testimony, Diane maintained her emotional defense, claiming I was too hard on Chloe and that she was merely trying to help her daughter. Under cross-examination by Mark, however, her story unraveled. Mark pressed her on the medical purpose of the card versus the $9,000 rent payment. "Mrs. Vance, did the hospital require a $9,000 rent payment to treat your condition?" Mark asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Diane stammered, "No. But Chloe needed. You knowingly allowed your other daughter to defraud the cardholder, your daughter, Elora, of nearly $50,000 for non-medical expenses. You were entrusted to protect that card for medical bills, yet you authorized theft for luxury items and rent. Is that correct?" Diane finally broke, admitting, "Yes. I knew she was spending it." Her tearful admission was the final crack in their defense. The judge was stern and clearly unimpressed by the emotional pleas. He ruled swiftly and decisively, granting the order of restitution against both Chloe and Diane Vance, jointly and severally, for the full amount of $47,218.44, plus my legal and forensic accounting fees, totaling an additional $12,000. The total civil judgment stood at nearly $60,000. The judge ordered that, because Chloe had no assets, the restitution would be primarily taken from Diane's assets. This included a forced lien on her house and a garnishment of her pension, ensuring I would recover the funds over time. As we left the courtroom, Chloe approached me, but this time, there was no defiance, just a defeated look. "I'm sorry, Elara," she whispered. "I didn't think you'd go this far. I didn't think you'd steal my entire future." I countered, my gaze unwavering. "I went as far as I had to." My mother stood a few feet away, her face contorted in silent fury. She had chosen her favorite daughter's selfishness over her eldest daughter's security. The court had simply validated my choice to protect myself. The legal victory was complete, but the recovery process was just beginning. The criminal case was settled with Chloe pleading guilty to a reduced felony, which was conditionally discharged, and later reduced to a misdemeanor, contingent upon her adherence to the civil restitution order. This meant she avoided immediate jail time, but now had a record, a constant reminder of the consequences of financial fraud. The real battle was collecting the nearly $60,000 in civil judgment. Because Chloe had no assets, the burden of repayment fell almost entirely on my mother, Diane. Mark secured the lien on Diane's house and initiated the garnishments on her retired nurse pension. The garnishments were significant, forcing her to dramatically downsize her lifestyle. The house, which she had always intended to pass down to her daughters, now carried a massive lien in my name. The ultimate family irony was that the $47,000 debt Chloe ran up forced Diane to use the very equity she was trying to protect to repay the daughter she betrayed. It took 18 months of meticulous tracking by Mark's firm, but the repayment was slow, steady, and inevitable. Every month, a portion of Diane's pension went directly to my bank account. I didn't spend the money, I funneled it into a high-yield savings account, slowly rebuilding the capital that had been so cavalierly destroyed. The final, most crucial victory was the complete and permanent restoration of my credit. By securing the criminal conviction and the card company's finalized fraud investigation, every negative mark related to the $47,000 debt was scrubbed from my credit report. My score, which had dipped over 100 points, fully recovered and surpassed its previous high. This validated the entire process. I had protected my financial integrity and my future. I used the recovered funds, once the judgment was fully satisfied, to make a substantial down payment on an investment property, securing an asset that was entirely separate from my family's emotional and financial dysfunction. I never spoke to my mother or sister again. I achieved total restitution and financial separation. They had sought to enrich one sister at the expense of the other, but the legal system, with my skills as a financial analyst guiding the charge, ensured that the perpetrators paid, and the victim was fully restored. The money was paid, the debt was cleared, and the ultimate price, the relationship, was a cost I was now willing to bear for my freedom. The final wire transfer for the nearly 60,000 judgment arrived on a Tuesday morning, a day that felt less like a victory and more like a solemn closing ceremony. The money represented the end of the legal war, but also the final, complete loss of my family. I had successfully managed to protect myself, but the cost was a gaping, permanent hole where my mother and sister used to be. I chose to use the recovered funds not just for savings, but for a solid asset that symbolized my independence. I closed on an investment condominium near my firm, purchased with a significant down payment that only my excellent, restored credit could secure. The deed was in my name, and the entire transaction was immaculate, the very antithesis of the messy, deceitful financial arrangement that had caused the lawsuit. The apartment was more than just property, it was a fortress of my own making. My career as a financial analyst thrived during this period, fueled by the professional rigor I applied to my personal case. I was promoted shortly after the civil judgment was finalized, the firm recognizing the intense, meticulous work ethic I demonstrated. The irony was palpable. The family who tried to derail my future ended up giving me the financial incentive and the professional proving ground that accelerated my success. They thought I would crumble. I leveraged their betrayal into a promotion. The silence from Diane and Chloe was complete. My mother had made a few more attempts at contact, immediately after the lien was placed on her home. But her messages were all variations of guilt and anger, never remorse. "You have successfully ruined my retirement, Elara. I hope you're happy with yourself." I never responded, adhering strictly to Mark Stevens' advice, zero contact. Their lawyer eventually sent a formal letter asking for a family settlement that would allow Diane to regain her full pension and lift the lien sooner. But Mark and I declined. The settlement had already been determined by a judge, their only option was adherence to the court order. Chloe, having nearly faced jail time, learned a harsh, costly lesson about the difference between a family favor and a felony. I heard through a distant cousin that she was working minimum wage jobs and struggling to make ends meet, unable to secure credit or a lease due to her record. While I felt a brief pang of regret for her misfortune, I quickly reminded myself that her misfortune was a direct consequence of her intentional, prolonged fraud. My feelings were compartmentalized. The regret was for the relationship that should have been. But the conviction was for the adult who chose to commit a crime. The price of my freedom was the total severance from my past. I changed my phone number, moved to a new neighborhood, and effectively scrubbed them from my present reality. My life became centered on my work, my new community, and the friends who had supported me without judgment. I chose to replace the toxic relationships with intentional, healthy ones. The 47,000 betrayal wasn't just a lesson in legal finance, it was the ultimate, albeit agonizing, lesson in self-preservation. I realized that some family ties are less about love and more about financial dependency and manipulation. By enforcing the law, I didn't just reclaim my credit, I reclaimed my autonomy. I walked away from the house, the emotional baggage, and the toxic expectation of sacrifice, a wealthier, stronger, and fundamentally free woman. The final chapter was written not in court documents, but in the silence where my mother's voice used to be, a silence that finally brought me peace.